Hello, everybody, and welcome to Resource Teacher's Guide. Today, we're jumping into a really important topic, which is what to do when reading interventions don't work. Now, this is really good for resource teachers, reading specialists, small group instructors, anybody who works with students who are struggling with reading. Now, traditional reading interventions have proven successful for most students, but what happens when they don't? We hear this all the time where teachers are like, listen, we've tried all the things, I've tried all the interventions, I've tried all the programs, and our student is just not making progress. Well, today let's talk about the key questions to ask, strategies to consider, and how to approach this reading instruction so that your students, but especially your students with mild to moderate learning disabilities, don't plateau. And I promise you by the end of this video, you're going to have one, if not 8, different directions and strategies to try to help your student get out of that plateau spot and start to move. First we want to talk about is it a will or is it a skill? Now, we always recommend to our teachers that you start here and you address in your reading intervention, is our student not progressing because of a missing skill, or is it a struggle with their will? So think behavior and motivation. So a lot of times this can be a really simple fix, and usually just implementing a more targeted reinforcement strategy can answer this question really, really quickly. So that can look a couple different ways. It could be reinforcing more often. Maybe your reinforcements need to be more targeted to your student. Maybe your student doesn't want candy. Maybe instead for their reinforcement, they want to draw for 2 minutes. Your next one is you may just be asking for too much at this time. Now remember, sometimes we have to meet our students where they're at. And so if we need to do that, we need to say, I'm going to shorten this task a little bit, and I'm going to ask them to do this much, and then I'm slowly going to build their capacity over time to do longer and longer tasks. But once you've ruled out that the student's progress is due to a lack of will, then we can start diving in and start to really focus on identify what skills we need to address to help them to start succeeding in their reading interventions. All right, so to sum up here, if you are unsure if it is a will or a skill that is keeping your student from progressing, try reinforcing more often. Reinforcements need to be more targeted to your student, and try shortening the expectation or the task that your student is doing. The next question that you want to be asking is there an issue with the receptive or expressive language? Now, these two things were taught to me by our speech and language pathologist at our school, who was amazing, and it totally changed some of my teaching strategies, because I learned that a lot of my students could understand concept or had skills mastered with their receptive language, but not with their expressive language, if that makes sense. SLPs, don't judge me if I said that wrong. So the receptive language is their ability to understand and comprehend language that you hear or that you read. So it's information that's coming in, versus your expressive language is your ability to communicate like your needs and your wants, or just like say the things that you've learned, like naming a letter. So what you could do is you could start testing their receptive language for some of those skills that are missing versus their expressive language for some of those skills that are missing. So if I wasn't sure if the students were really understanding their letter sounds, I would say, okay, let's test it receptively and expressively. So I would just call the letter sound and I would have them point to it. So rather than saying it or being like, hey, here's this letter, what sound is that? I'd say, hand me the sound ah. And if they could do that, then I knew, okay, they are mastering those letter sounds. They are getting those skills. They're just not able to say it to me expressively. And then, of course, the reverse is that I would just show them the sound and I would say, hey, what sound is this? And they'd say, ah. So you may want to be checking their receptive and expressive skills and see if they're getting it one way or the other. Because if they're able to get it receptively, but they're not able to move expressively, that's going to be something that you probably want to work with your speech and language pathologist on, is how to get that to transfer better. If you want to see an example of this in action, click the link that I have below, go sign up for an email, and we'll send you a free alphabet intervention that uses receptive and expressive skills to help master those alphabet sounds. I have videos in there that are video models. It's all free. That will show you how to do a combination of receptive or expressive. And I'm actually going to talk about the intervention again in a few minutes. Okay, so to sum up, if your students may or may not be struggling with receptive or expressive, focus on receptive first, test that, check it out, see if that's what's going on. Then focus on the expressive skills. If it's one of those things, talk to your speech pathologist. You guys use them. They're so good. Okay, use them. Okay, the next one is, are they retaining the information? So is it that the student isn't learning it, or is it that the student isn't retaining it? Because if it's a retainment issue, that's a different thing that we need to address. That's a different skill. So there's arguably two main ways to help students remember things over time, at least in our scope as resource teachers, reading specialists, small group specialists, those kinds of things. And the two ways are called maintenance rehearsal and elaborative rehearsal. Now, maintenance rehearsal is kind of like the drill and kill. It's when we're going over a skill over and over and over without necessarily knowing why. And this is a really important thing for our students because, as we know, especially students with learning disabilities, they have to be exposed to something about 7 times longer than other students before they actually get it. But if we're not moving into application or moving into what's called that elaborative rehearsal and giving meaning to that information, then a lot of those sounds are just going to stick into that short-term memory and they're not going to carry over. So when you're doing your radio interventions, you want to make sure that you're working on those skills and you're addressing both pieces of it. So you're doing that maintenance or the drill and kill, and then you're immediately or as quickly as you can moving it into that elaborative or that application to show the students why it's important and how they're actually going to use it. A really good example of this is our alphabet intervention. Go below, click sign up for our email, and you'll get the alphabet intervention for free with the videos. And we walk through how you can help the student retain information and practice retaining information through what we call distractors. And the first one is we do non-academic distractors, academic distractors, and then a variation where we'll show you a couple different ways that you can do it depending on your students' expressive and receptive strengths. So I wanted to give you more of an example of when we talk about elaboration rehearsal and what we look for in classrooms and with our teachers working with students. So here's a page of our reading program. So this part of our program, we've actually only taught 2 letters to our students, but as we go to this next page, you can see that immediately, even with those 2 letters, we immediately jump into reading. We don't wait. I hear all the time, people are like, oh, well, we're still working on alphabet sounds, so we're not jumping into reading yet. Okay, that's great, but that's still a lot of that is that maintenance practice, and we need to jump into that elaboration if we're going to have the students retain the information because they actually can see and feel and know, oh, this has purpose, this has reason, I'm going to use this. So if we find that our students' issue or the reason why they are not progressing is a retainment issue, we're going to build in intentional distractors, and we're going to do maintenance paired with elaborative rehearsal. So drill and kill with immediate application. All right, now this one is an interesting one because it's something that I actually didn't start to understand until I became a coach. And that is that when we are working with students with learning disabilities and our instruction, we have to really consider the learning characteristics. And this goes beyond knowing, the learning characteristics of our students' disabilities. And this goes beyond just saying like, oh, well, my student struggles with reading. Oh, well, my student is just kind of slow. Okay, but let's really dive into those and let's get specific. So for example, when many of our disabilities are partnered with slow processing or an inability to focus or a need for visuals, a need for audio, a need for explicit written steps, a need for micro steps or scaffolding. So not only is this differentiation, but in the resource classroom, this literally is specially designed instruction. This is what makes us specialists, is that we take these strategies and we take this instruction and we break it down to help our students learn how to learn with these learning characteristics. So I want you to take a minute and I want you to analyze your instruction. I want you to ask this question: am I designing this instruction to specifically meet the needs of my students' learning disabilities? Now, I'm not going to dive too much into this one just because this is such a huge topic. I could go on and on and on forever about it. But basically what you want to say is, where am I going to have problems for this student? Where do I need to add in visuals? Where do I need to make sure that I'm going to have to be giving them breaks throughout because I know that the student struggles with attention. If your student is not making progress and you think, hey, I don't think I'm actually addressing learning characteristics, I want you to list your students' learning characteristics out. And then next to each learning characteristic, I want to make a plan to specifically address those for that student in your next reading intervention. Okay, the next one is generalizing. And this one is one that we actually forget a lot to teach with our students who struggle and our students who have learning disabilities. With a lot of our students, we have to actually teach our kids to be like, oh, wait, I can take this skill from my small group instruction and I can apply it into the general ed classroom, or I can apply it into the library, or I can apply it into PE. We need to actually provide opportunities to teach them to generalize that skill sometimes. And that's why it's not working. That's why sometimes you'll hear people be like, oh, well, they are able to do this in the classroom, but they can't do it in the gen ed. I'm not saying that's always. Sometimes it has to do with supports and breakdowns and whatever. But some of the time, it's because of this generalizing that our students are not able to progress because they're not generalizing skill to concepts well enough. So we want to be building in opportunities to generalize outside of the immediate group or the immediate moment that we taught that skill in. So I'm going to go back to letter sounds again because it's just easy and that's all my brain. So this might look like having them identify the letter sound on a math page they're working on. So we worked on the letter N, we worked on that sound. Now we're in math and I'm going to say, hey, what letter is that? Hey, what sound is that? And now I'm teaching them general. It's like, oh, what I learned over here still applies in this case. It doesn't change. It's still there. We can also be like, okay, I'm going to be walking through the halls and now I'm going to go and I'm going to look at all the pictures and I'm going to say, hey, find the letter N up on these walls as we're walking back to class. This could also look like having their gen ed principal, janitor, other faculty members show them the sound and ask them for it. They have to apply that knowledge with other people and in other environments. A good kind of buildup is I'm going to teach them to generalize within the group, outside the moment, right? So outside the moment, but within my group. And then I'm going to teach them to generalize it still within my classroom, so within the setting. And then I'm going to teach them to do it outside the setting, and then outside the setting and with another person. So that could be kind of your steps to take for teaching students to generalize. I know explicit instruction can kind of be a buzzword, but it is so important for students who struggle with reading and so important for students with learning disabilities. So explicitly teaching something means that we are systematically, step by step, using an array of examples and not examples with data collection. Sorry, I keep looking at myself. With data collection. A lot of times teachers will tell us that they've explicitly taught the skill, but then when we start diving into it, what they've actually done is they've given them a really pretty overview of that skill. So, for example, if you teach the rule to be respectful, and the teacher will be like, oh yeah, well, I taught them, like, it means to be nice, it means to be kind, it means to be considerate. Now that's great, but we need to make sure that we're teaching them what it looks like, what it sounds like. We want to give them examples. We want to give them non-examples. And we want to show them and teach them how it works in multiple settings. Now, again, with your reading instruction, the same concept applies. I need you guys to look at your reading invention or your strategy or your skill, and I need you to say, does my reading instruction need to be more explicit? Does it need to be more systematic? And does it need to be more intentional? What you can try is giving examples, and this might be sound, sight, what it feels, what it means. Non-examples, same thing, sound, sight, feel, what it means. We need to make sure that we're being intentional, and we need to make sure that we're being systematic, meaning now, I want to clarify intentional and systematic. What we mean is you know what you're doing, when you're doing it, and why you're doing it. And you know how that student has passed it, meaning that you're doing regular data collection and making database decisions. Okay, accommodations. I always laugh at this one because I get a lot of pushback from teachers because they want their students to learn it without any crutches. And now we totally understand this thought process. But also let's remember that if you have a student that has a broken leg and they need to use crutches and you're like, hey, you just need to learn to walk, like you need to suck it up, and you take those crutches away, kid's gonna fall. I mean, it's gonna happen. Eventually, yes, we want our students to be able to do work on the skill or work on whatever you're working on, read without any accommodations. But we also have to remember that we have to meet the students where they're at. And sometimes that means providing accommodations so that the student can learn better or they can learn deeper. Now, eventually, yes, we want the student to be able to do that skill or task or read without any supports. But until that student has been able to master that specific skill that you're having to accommodate, until their leg is healed, the accommodation or that crutch is the only thing that's going to help them continue to learn within your reading intervention. It is important, however, and this is something I really want to push, it is important that if you provide accommodations or scaffolds or supports, that you do have a long-term plan to get rid of those supports over time. Think about your students' learning characteristics, disabilities, their struggles, and is there an accommodation that we can provide or a support that we can put in that can help them move forward with their learning? So this might be like a sound chart, a calculator, a multiplication chart, a pencil grip, whatever. I don't know why I'm using math. This is a reading topic, but you get my point. Is there something that we can provide that will allow them to continue to learn or to learn better in the meantime? Eventually, we want to take that accommodation away. So what do we try? Accommodate the skill so that they can learn deeper or so that they can apply better. Collaboration. You guys, if there's one thing you take away from this, I mean, I want you to apply all of it. But if there is one thing you really take away with it, it is to collaborate. You are not a one-man show. It is not your job to get that student caught up. It is the team's job to get that student caught up. So we cannot be masters in all the areas. If you have a student who is struggling, reach out. Reach out to their service providers. Speech and language pathologists and occupational therapists blew my mind all the time with their knowledge. So we cannot be masters in all areas. Reach out to specialists in your school. Reach out to your psychologist, reach out to the reading specialist in your area, reach out to the curriculum coaches. There are other people in your school that are experts in your field. You do not need to be experts in everything, but it is your job for the betterment of the students' learning to collaborate with everyone. Summary: use your team, all of them. SLP, OT, resource, gen ed, school specialists, everyone. Use your team so that we can all work together to get this students reading to the best of their abilities. Okay, you guys, last but not least, you may need to look at your systems that you are using, because one of the biggest things that we see is that teachers teach too much in isolation and they need to be moving more into application. Or again, going back to that concept that we talked about earlier, spending too much time in maintenance and not enough time in rehearsal. So I want you to take a second, think about your group, think about your day. What do you do? Do you have more of a balance? And if you don't have a balance, do you spend a decent amount of time being like, I'm working on these phonics and phonemic awareness skills, and then at least once or twice a week, I'm actually getting into books and I'm teaching them to apply those strategies, and I'm naming those strategies and I'm modeling those strategies in the actual reading. We're actually applying it. Because if you're not, I want you guys to think about the last time that you did a task that you were like, what are we even doing this for? Why am I doing this? Did you put any effort into it? No. Did you have a good attitude about it? No. Did you really learn anything from just mindlessly doing the skill, not knowing why you were doing it? Probably not. And our students are the same way. We need to make sure that we're playing. If you're like, oh, hey, I think that this might be me, get into application now. And also make sure you're reviewing their goals daily. They need to remember, we are doing this because it's going to help you. We are doing this because you want to be able to read this book. And to be able to read this book, you have to be able to do this skill. So let's get it mastered so we can get to where you want to be. They need to have that why daily. Okay, now what? We're to the end of this video. And I'm sure you're like, hey, you gave us all this information. So now what do I do? The first thing I want you to do is, again, go below, click the link, get on our email list, go follow us on social media. We talk about all these strategies all the time. Second, I want you to pick one student, just one, and I want you to go through each of these questions, and I want you to answer them, and I want you to make a plan to remediate any of the areas that you're missing within your reading intervention. If that feels really overwhelming to you, then sit down with a team member or sit down with just one team member and say, hey, let's go through these questions together to see what we need to do to help our student be successful in reading. And here is my closing remark to you. Do not try to fix everything for every student, for every group right away. You're going to get overwhelmed and you're not going to be able to help the students to the best of their abilities and to the best of your abilities. So start with one, no teacher guilt, no stress, no anxiety. Start with one, work through it, get a feel for it, and then you can start to apply it to other students or other groups. But start small. You guys are amazing. So grateful for you. We can't wait to see you on our next video, and we'll chat soon.